Hello, everyone. I'm going to go through the process of unmuting all of you. And feel free to mute yourself.
I will export X for you. So
I am unmuting all of you, just so you know. I'm unmuting everyone as they come in. We'll wait another minute to get started. All right, well, we have a pretty good crowd. Welcome everyone today. Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk a bit about GOTV, which I'm sure is on all of your minds now as we get closer to the election. We had a meeting of the minds of some of the data managers that have been around a few cycles a few weeks ago. And came up with kind of a list of, some tips, some best practices, some resources that all of you can use as we start thinking about GOTV. These documents are linked to. I hear some folks talking. These documents are linked to in the calendar invite, so feel free to reach out.
I don't know, this is a new computer.
Go ahead and pull those up or follow along on the screen. So we're going to start off today with Jordan Brandt talking a little bit about some tips and best practices that we put together for you. And Jordan, you're currently muted, but yeah, there you go.
There we go. Hey, everybody. We put together this document. A few of us have been around for many GOTV and learned a couple things along the way that we thought folks might find helpful, and we'll just start moving through these. Some of the points on this list we'll actually skip over because they'll be talked about in greater detail later on in the call. Of course, what works best for you and your table may vary a little bit from this, but we've all found and agreed that this stuff is pretty helpful. And if you can implement this, it might make it a little bit easier on you. Number one, doing your best not to plan vacations and time off from September through Election Day. As we know, the pace can really pick up during those months. You might have a fairly relaxed year leading up to that, have some time to investigate some projects you're really interested in, where mostly September on, you're going to be handling a whole bunch of partner requests and want to be able to do that as quickly as possible and make sure that you're the person there, so you know that whatever systems you've set up are going to be stuck to, and you won't have any surprises later on. If you get sick, we all like to think that we're pretty tough, but try to take time off and recover. It's not just you that you have to think about, but you might be getting other people sick or getting partners sick. If you feel you really have to be there, you're better off maybe at home where no one else has a chance to catch whatever you have. Number three is about scheduling working hours, if you find that your table has some partners that you might need to help a little bit later in the night, or something like you have a bunch of late night dialers or something going on, you may want to plan to start work later and end later. And certainly I can say for Massachusetts, this principle also sort of applies to the day that it's happening on. Our Fridays are really, really crazy. So you might want to think Friday is a day to have more availability. This will come down to how your partners operate, and some of it is also related to what kind of systems you've set up with your partners and managing those expectations. If there's more than one of you in the state, that sounds very, very nice. It would make a lot of sense to make sure that you have a clear process of who is doing what. So just decide beforehand that you'll take care of accounts and you'll be helping out with phone services or something like that, so you can both stay focused, make sure you're not duplicating any work, and can service your partners as efficiently as possible. Next one, plan ahead, having meetings with partners for turf coordination. Turf coordination can be a long slog. You'll often be sort of bartering between groups, acting like a broker. Some people may want the same turf. The sooner you can get to that, the better, just so everyone is on the same page when you're actually in the thick of things. Number 6, this is so important, collecting polling locations and early voting sites early. We'll talk more about early voting later on, but depending on the state you're in, it may be a challenge getting all the up-to-date polling locations. If you have a bunch of small towns and municipalities that your partners actually do work in, it's really important to get in touch with those city clerks early on, just to avoid any last-minute scares. Sometimes you may even be able to get this from a state agency, but I've often found lots of smaller cities may not get that data to the appropriate state contacts, so you might not get a nice, pristine, one and done sort of file. You may be having to check these websites for PDF polling locations, things like that, and sometimes they don't do a very good job of giving notice on a switch to a polling location. So you want to do that as early as possible. I really recommend just sending an email or giving a call to city clerks, especially if you've had trouble with those areas in the past. For EV data, Catalyst does a good job of this. They can sort of take this off your plate to a large degree. You are going to be busy, and folks strongly recommend that you just let Catalyst take care of this for you. It's not that it's impossible for you to do, but hopefully you have a lot of other things going on. You're helping out partners, and we should take up Catalyst on their offer to do it for us. Targeting, we will get into in greater detail later. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all, but that'll be talked about some more. Guidelines for partners and your time. It's a great practice in your states to let partners know that this is sort of the expected timeline for everything. Of course, it's really nice if you see an email come by and you say, oh, I can handle this by 4 p.m. That's awesome. But it is a good idea for them to have just a general sense of, this isn't wizardry. It might take some time to accomplish what they're looking to do. And it's important for them to plan ahead. You're going to be getting requests from a lot of different people and may not be able to drop everything for one single partner that wasn't planning far enough ahead. So it's good to convey that early on. You do not have to answer your phone at 1 in the morning unless you really want to. Some people recommend just turning off the phone, and that can definitely be useful for a couple different reasons. One, sanity, but also if you're getting very specific requests that are related to technical things, it's a lot better to get that in an email in most cases. So if it's, will you reset these user accounts? It's nice to have those spelled out in an email versus trying to listen to that over the phone. Or if someone says there's a problem with this voter or this record, it's a lot easier to get a VAN ID in an email than it is to get it over the phone or on a voicemail. Of course, as you get into the very final parts of the cycle, that is all probably going to go out the window. You'll be putting out a lot of fires. You'll want to get to them as quickly as possible, and you'll have to do some prioritization there. For us, and the way I sort of look at it is the things that immediately go to the top are things that stop people from working. So someone cannot log into their account and they have folks coming into the office, or a predictive dialer is kicking everyone off. Maybe it's run out of minutes. I always try to put the things that get people back into the field as fast as possible at the top of the pile and then work my way down. If your state is having GOTV planning meetings, you definitely want to be a part of it. In many cases, you probably already are, but if you hear about something like that happening, always a good idea to try to get yourself into that, because you'll be thinking of things that they probably haven't considered, but will be happy we're all settled beforehand before there actually was a problem. Knowing the table's GOTV budget, that'll help you make some decisions about the types of voter contacts that you can use. Maybe you're rolling in cash and want to use Hustle and all kinds of fancy tools, or maybe it's going to be more of a VPB ramen kind of year. That's very helpful when you're realistically talking through partners of what you're going to be able to help them do. Also useful if they know that they might need to budget some of their own funds for various things that they want to achieve. It's good to let them know up front so they can have that taken care of. Weekly check-ins, a lot of people probably are already doing that, but a very good idea just to be on the same page with everyone. We know here it says state director. Of course, if you have field folks, you want to be talking to them a lot as well, and they should be part of that meeting. And then when you are having these check-ins, let them understand that every partner thinks their request is the most urgent, most important. That usually is not the case. They're all urgent in their own way, but you'll have to prioritize and let people know that you will get to these requests, but you can't do everything at the exact same time. That is a great lead-in to under promise and over deliver. GOTV is not the time you want to make stretch goals or think, wouldn't it be nice if I could automate this thing, or, give you a map of every, precinct in the state with a bunch of information overlaid on it. You don't want to get into big kind of projects like that. You should be thinking through that, even though I don't know what all of the things that are going to be pulling me away for time are right now, they will happen. People are going to have problems, and you don't want to overextend yourself. So it's okay to say, I probably can't do that before X date or even before the election. You want to make sure that you're available and ready to respond to some of the fires that are going to pop up. Giving yourself at least one day off per week and don't work at all that day. We all say this and we all peek at our phones for export requests or that kind of thing. But for your own mental health and sanity, you should try to stick to that as best as possible. And a little bit of planning will help you achieve that. Data entry deadlines for partners sounds very severe, but this is also very important. Later on, it's your partners who are going to want this data. And even if you have to be the bad cop now, getting on them about getting stuff entered, they will be happy later on when they don't do things like go back to a door they've already knocked and have ID'd the person or knows they don't live there. It's really important that they're doing data entry on a regular schedule to preserve that data forever, but also to make sure that the next canvas, the next phone bank goes off as efficiently as possible. And that's in line with what they want to achieve, even if they're being stubborn about that huge stack of walk sheets that's on someone's desk or in their trunk. It's really easy for it to get away from them if someone isn't constantly reminding them to get that data entry in, and that's probably going to be you. 17, My Campaign. My Campaign can be a fantastic tool, especially if you're into like tracking shifts. and that sort of thing, which is really good field practice. But it is more complicated to set up and also to train on for partners. The whole notion of my campaign is blank and people have to be copied in or created new is hard for some partners to wrap their head around. You don't want to be stuck in a 3-hour My Campaign training when you have all kinds of other My Voters electoral work happening. So you can absolutely say, like, this is the cutoff for doing new My Campaign databases. You know, the majority of their work can be handled through My Voters. And if they haven't wanted to set up systems for managing volunteers and events in a more sophisticated way in the past, now is not a good time to start. Keeping things in perspective, it can be very stressful, and you will feel rushed, and you are rushed. That's okay. If you get overly rushed and get frazzled, it's just going to take longer to achieve things. When you know really the only way to remove some of that stress is to ship out whatever you need to get out and have your partners working. 15 minutes of time to think through what really needs to be done is a very useful task. Took me a while to warm up to this one, thinking 15 minutes was a long time. But that really is a helpful exercise to go through. You know, priorities are always changing, so you have to keep revisiting those and think about, does this new thing need to move up to the top, or can we get to that tomorrow? So you've always got to be thinking, what is really the most important? And you're probably going to be the only one in your state who can answer that as far as data is concerned. So it's a good idea for you to be very thoughtful and deliberate about prioritizing the work. I really like the piece that was put in, how do I spend my time to get the most people out to vote, and use that as sort of your core driving value. And get in the mindset of triaging, yeah, and we talked about, it's tons of little fires, and you're gonna have to run from one thing to the next. Maybe you have a really beautiful solution for something, but you don't necessarily need to implement that all the time. You can get people back out into the field, back to entering data. That should be the #1 priority. And of course, priorities are different for everyone. Do's and don'ts, go to bed early the night before. Yeah, election day is always a very long work day, especially if you have to vote that morning. And hopefully we're seeing some lines at polling places because we want to see some great turnout. So vote absentee if you can, if your state allows that. And if not, and you know you're going to have to go to the polls yourself, be the first person in line so you can get out there and get back to helping your partners turn way more people out to those polls. Don't agree to do any GOTV work in the field. You should not be holding a sign when your partner's predictive dialers are not working. It just doesn't work. I think we've all tried it to some degree. I was at a polling place once with a laptop and a hotspot, and it was terrible. And some things that we would have liked to have gotten done didn't, because it was just a sort of, wouldn't it be nice if we could be at this polling place? Yeah, even though it's great to be in the field, it's fun to knock and drag those last sort of voters, get excited about participating, but it just isn't going to work for you. You're going to help a lot greater number of people, making sure your partner's operation goes smoothly. That's more than one single person is ever going to be able to do in the field. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Prepare and be available for emergencies. Of course, there will be emergencies, no matter how expertly the prep work has been done. Emergencies are going to happen, and you'll be the one who knows how to deal with them. Always be by that computer. Make sure that you have a backup plan for internet access. You know, it could be your office Wi-Fi has a problem. You might want to make sure you know where Ethernet jack is, have a cord ready. If you have a hotspot on your phone, make sure you know how it works and your computer is connected to it beforehand. And then one other, you know, sort of emergency, people who've gone through election days before know that van can be slow, no matter how great your internet is. A lot of people will be using van at once. It's not even uncommon to see 1-minute page loads, which can really cramp your style when you're trying to support a bunch of people quickly. The only thing you can really do about that is just be as prepared as possible in advance. You don't want to be, creating new complicated searches that you have to run for a partner on election day. You want to do everything you can to have all of that stuff done beforehand. I also like to have PDF copies of whatever I can, just in case something's going on with van. It's great if partners are using BPB and using minivan and all these things that eliminate data entry. But in case something goes wrong, you want to be sure that you have a bit of a backup plan to help them out and make sure they're out there working.
All right, thank you so much, Jordan. That was great. I'm going to unmute everyone who I haven't unmuted so far. Did we miss anything important from those of you that have gone through?
Arguably, like the most difficult policy issues, like very easy to sell, bipartisan cost savings. That part is great.
Have someone's talking. There we go. So does anyone have anything to add? Okay, great. And I would add that keep in mind that we are a network, and we have a national staff to support you. We also have some really talented data staff in the States. You are not alone. If you have a problem, bring it to Slack. Bring it to one of us on the national staff, and someone will help you out. We want to make sure that GOTV runs smoothly for every state, and that none of you are working 12-hour, 15-hour days. So let's all work together to help each other out and make sure that that happens. So I'm going to turn it over to Nick.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm on the phone and never used GoToWebinar on the phone before because I'm out crawling through old voter registrations in Athens right now. So I'm talking about targeting today. I'm going to keep it really, really brief. I think there are two major things that you need to keep in mind. The first is that as you're working with partners, they're going to have desires to make their universes really, really narrow. You're going to have a lot of folks who are saying, we really want to talk to young people between the ages of 18 and 24 who are Latino and have voted in one of the last 4 elections, and you end up with a universe that's really, really small. I think it's incumbent on you to, as maybe the one who has more experience with targeting or has seen those narrow universes lead to really unwalkable turf, to push back a little bit and encourage folks to give slightly broader universes. And so that should be especially true for the doors. Times that volunteers are spend walking is not times that they're talking to people at the door, and so they shouldn't be going to every 20th door if there's a lot of people in the neighborhood that are potentially good targets. And so what we tend to do in Georgia is have more narrow universes on the phones where we have a bigger group of people to work with and can be a little bit more picky about who we're choosing to work with. And then cast a wider net on the doors where really having as many people in the universe is really critical because otherwise volunteers are wasting a lot of time and not getting the productivity that you need. The other major thing that I think is worth talking about because of the specifics of working in a midterm election, because it should be part of every universe, is vote propensity. So we know in general in a midterm election that folks who are more towards the middle of the score are generally going to be more impacted by GOTV. I don't think we're quite as confident in exactly what that slope looks like as other people do, but the basics are pretty intuitive, right? If you have someone who has a 98 vote propensity score, it means the only reason they're not going to vote is something extraordinary happens where it's not going to matter if you talk to them, right? That person is extraordinarily likely to vote. You just don't have that much room to have a conversation with a volunteer be that impactful. I think there's a similar case to be made for folks at the very low end of the vote propensity score, that if someone has been registered to vote for 10 years and never voted once before, that person likely has a worldview that has caused them over and over and over again to make the same choice, which is not to vote. And while we need to get those people on board in the long term, that's part of building power, that conversations with them are likely to be less impactful because you have less barrier to voting. Really, the people you're looking for to maximize the conversations are going to be the people who are maybe thinking about it and the maybe if it rains they won't bother kinds of people. Those are the people that can be most easily impacted. I would recommend when you're looking at vote propensity to use the vote propensity score rather than vote history. I think a lot of our partners are drawn towards vote history because it's a little more transparent, a little more intuitive. But the downside of that is that you're trying to take past history and make a guess about what that means for their likelihood of voting this year. And the model is just going to do that better than you are. With some exceptions, I think the biggest one being include newly registered voters in your universe always, because we don't have enough information there, and I would err on the side of including folks. The last point I'd make about vote propensity is that when you're thinking about doing this, think also about what other work is happening in your state. Obviously, you're not coordinating, but something to keep in mind is that if you've got a massive governor's race and you know that they're very likely to be doing a ton of field, maybe you want to drop lower on the vote propensity score because you don't want to be talking to the same people, and you have the opportunity then to do some of that work that maybe is a little bit more difficult, maybe has less short-term return on investment, but is part of the movement of building power in the long term, which is talking to people who are less likely to be impacted by the conversation, less likely to vote, but still need to be brought along. If you know that no work, on the other hand, is happening in the field really, and that your partners are the only thing that's going to happen, I would be more selective and really go more towards the middle end of the vote propensity scale. So what we use in Georgia as our scale generally is 5 to 95 on the 2018 vote propensity model. That's the middle 60th percentile, which is a little bit surprising to folks, but the distribution of these vote propensity scores is sometimes funky. So in Georgia, there's a ton of people at the very low end, under 5. There's a ton of people at the very upper end, over 95, and fewer people in those middle buckets. Definitely, if you haven't done so already, I'd recommend that you take a look at the Q tool, see what the distribution is in your state, and make decisions about vote propensity for universes from there.
Great, thank you, Nick. And everyone, I've put together a GOTV universe creation guide. I recommend all of you look at that and read it over as you begin to create your GOTV universe. This has also been shared with the state director, so they're aware of it. And definitely come to me or to Slack with any questions that you have about it. It's really important that you go over your GOTV universe with as many people who will listen to you, just so that you can make sure that your methodology is correct. This is so important. If organizations are spending money on their GOTV program and you target incorrectly, you are getting the wrong folks out to vote, or you're not making an impact at all because you are contacting people that are either extremely unlikely to vote or already are going out to the polls no matter what. So it's really, really important that you have the step-by-step down, and just know that there's members on the national team willing to help you. There's other data managers that can just listen to your step-by-step and tell you and give you feedback. You should talk it over with your state director, talk it over with your field staff. But this is too important to focus on exclusively alone. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul now. Paul, you're now unmuted.
Perfect. Thank you, Angela. All right. Well, I just posted something up on Slack that has a link to the document I'm about to share. Are you able to see that? It's in the data calls channel.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to assume you all can. So I'm here to talk about polling locations. And I don't know if you all know, but the van has a place for polling locations. And how did that data get there? Well, it's not coming from the van. It's not coming from Catalyst. It's coming from all of us. It's our responsibility to make sure the van is populated with polling locations and to make sure they're correct. Now, you might think, oh, well, my van already has polling locations in there, so I'm all set. But you can't assume that the polling locations stay the same from election to election. In fact, it's probably likely that they have changed a little bit from year to year. So the first step is you want to make sure that the polling locations are completely cleared out from all previous elections. And Angela, I think you were planning to do that across the board nationwide. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm working with AV. We're hoping to get that done in the next couple weeks. But yeah, we expect to clear out all of the polling locations nationally.
All right. So, Angela, you might want to check with us before you do that because I may have already loaded up my polling locations in my state in the next few weeks. But yeah, so the first thing you want to do is make sure all the polling locations are cleared out. It sounds like Angela's working on that. There's also a way for you to do that yourself. Or I suppose you could submit a support ticket and ask the van to do that for you. I'll talk a little bit later about how to clear out the polling locations yourself. Now, as far as putting the new polling locations in, you could do it manually, right? There is a place for you to go in and type the polling locations, but that would take a really long time. If you've got a state like mine, that means it's over 2,000 polling locations, and you don't want to be typing that in all manually. So you want to do this on a bulk level. The other thing I want to point out is that the polling locations affects both the State Voices and the America Votes van. So if you have a counterpart on the America Votes side, you might want to coordinate your effort with them to make sure you're not working against each other. In my state, what I tend to do is one of us does the polling locations and the other one does the early voting sites, and we tend to swap every year so that no one person is doing the same thing every year. So definitely coordinate with your counterpart on the AV side. All right, so the first step really is to obtain the list of polling locations from your Board of Elections or Secretary of State. That could be a little bit challenging. It's a little easier for me here in North Carolina. Generally, I'm able to find that either on the web or by contacting my Board of Elections and asking them for a file. And they're usually able to give it to me in Excel or something like that. It may be a little bit more challenging for you. Hopefully you have a contact at your Board of Elections that you could work with. If you don't, or if your Board of Elections is giving you a hard time, it might be that one of your partners has a contact over there that can work with you. So, for example, in my state, I have a partner who has a relationship with the Board of Elections that when I'm running into problems, he's often able to help me. The other way you could go is if you really can't get the file of polling locations from your state Board of Elections, you could do it on a county by county basis. I would not want to do that in North Carolina. We've got 100 counties. That would take me a long time to get 100 different sets of polling locations. But if you're in a state with fewer counties, that might be a possibility for you. The thing you want to make sure that the file you get from your Board of Elections has is the name of the county, a precinct code, a precinct name, the polling location, a description of that location if applicable, the address, the city, and the zip code. You might even want to tell them that that's the information that you need before they prepare the file for you. All right, so that's step one. Step two is download the current list of polling locations from the van. And the way that you do that is you go into My Voters, click on polling locations on the left side of the screen. You're going to see a blank screen, and that's because you need to choose a county from the drop-down list if you want just one county. But if you want the whole state, just leave that drop-down blank. And you can then click Export to Excel, and it will export a file for you of every single polling location that's currently in the van. Now, if your polling locations are cleared out, that's fine. It'll export a file with just a precinct ID, a county, a precinct code, and a precinct name, but blank polling locations. And that is fine. You actually want that. So now you've done step 2. You've got 2 files. You've got a file from your Board of Elections, and you've got a file from the van. The next step is the trickiest part of all. You want to try to match those 2 files together. And the way that you're going to match those 2 files together might vary a little bit, but generally speaking, you're going to want to use county and precinct code to match your 2 files together. It may vary a bit in your state. How do you match those 2 files together? Well, it depends on your level of expertise. You could use SQL, you could use Microsoft Access, you could use VLOOKUP in Microsoft Excel. It's really a matter of what you're comfortable with. But what you're really trying to do here is get the file that you got from your County Board of Elections to look like the file that you just exported from the van. So you want the file, the end result, to be the exact same field names as what you just downloaded from the van, with the new addresses on it, with the new information that you got from your Board of Elections. The most important field that it has to have is that precinct ID. That is the unique identifier that the van uses to identify which precinct is which. Couple things to think about when you're doing that match is you want to make sure that the file you got from the Board of Elections doesn't have more polling locations than the file you just downloaded from the van. If it does, then there's a problem. Or the reverse could be true, that you have more polling locations you downloaded from the van than what you got from your Board of Elections, in which case you need to do some research and figure out what the problem is. Usually there might be a precinct code that's just a little bit off, or maybe like in my state, sometimes they split the precincts into 2. So you need to do a little research to figure out what the problem is. But let's just assume you get those 2 files matched up together. You have it looking just the way it's supposed to, with the same field names in the same order that you just downloaded from the van, with that precinct ID in the leftmost column. Now you're ready to upload those files back up into the van. And this is really easy because you go to bulk upload, upload a new file, click on polling locations, and next. And it just walks you through a wizard on how to upload those polling locations into the van. And that's it. You should check your work, make sure it looks correct, and you're done. One thing I did want to mention, I said earlier that I would tell you how to clear out your own polling locations from the van. The way you would do that is export those polling locations from the van, make all the addresses and cities and state and zip blank, and then upload that blank file back up into the van, and you will overwrite what's already there. And that way you'll clear out your current polling locations. So it's really pretty easy to clear out your polling locations. All right, I know I went through that pretty quick, but there is a document that I can see a number of you have opened. I've also shared it on our Slack channel that walks you through all of this. If you're still having problems after looking through that document, I'm happy to help anybody. You can feel free to reach out to me via email or via Slack, and I'd be happy to help you. What sort of questions do folks have?
This is Tracy, and just wanted to chime in with a couple of quick notes that I've experienced too. One, your setup for your state might look different. Mine, for example, and I think a lot of places in the Northeast is not based on county, but is based on municipality, just because that's the way our data and voting systems are structured here. So don't be alarmed if the general setup is different. And then one thing, here in Maine that we have is our polling locations are actually open at different hours in the day. So that's something that I try to make sure is included in the polling location description so that canvassers will have that available to them. So something to think about, making sure that you're proactively asking either clerks or whatever election entity you might be working with for if you have issues like that in your state.
All right, well, that's it for me. Well, Angela, I think it's back to you.
Arturo, I think Arturo had a question. You're unmuted.
Yes. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So this is sort of in reference to when the lists might not match, because here in Nevada we have, or at least in Clark County, we have vote centers. And so I haven't looked at the full list of the vote centers that we'll have in our two biggest counties, but I feel like the list is going to be a little bit smaller. In the case that it is, what would be that process?
So could you explain to me how vote centers work? Are they only open on election day, or are they open prior to election day?
They're open during early vote, and the vote centers basically is like your when you receive your voter registration form card now in the mail as an applicant, you don't get a specific polling location tied to your address now. I think they're still narrowed maybe by county, but it's more so like you can go to any vote center if you're registered to vote and vote in that vote center, and it's not tied specifically to your precinct or your congressional district or anything like that.
Yeah, okay, that sounds very similar to the way that early voting is handled in North Carolina. And I believe I would recommend you use the early voting sites rather than the polling locations for that. And I believe that Iridani was going to talk about early voting sites next.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Paul. All right, Iridani, why don't you go ahead?
Awesome, thanks. Am I going to be able to be presenter just so that I can pull stuff up to show folks?
Yep, I just made you the presenter.
So I wanted just to quickly address Arturo's question, and that is what I was going to say. I was going to say probably going to have to load it similarly to early vote locations, since folks can actually go vote anywhere, you know, in Clark County, since Clark County is the one that implemented the vote centers on election day. So it'll work exactly the same as if it was the 2 weeks of early voting. The only thing is it will involve Van having to remove the actual early voting sites and then loading them, loading whatever the vote centers are for election day in a similar setup as the, you know, as early voting sites basically. So this document here, it's called Early Vote Location Loading Explanations and Examples, is what I would suggest that you all pull up, you know, if you want to follow along, or just like when you are doing this process, like this is going to be really helpful, you know, with examples to kind of look at if you have any particular questions. So there's like template notes here that you can check out for the columns that you're going to need to complete, along with some additional references. So for example, here, like looking at the example, and then I'll pull up one from our Nevada sites, is you're going to want to make sure that you have an ID of sorts, which if we look at the explanation for ID can really be like numerically ordered. So basically start with 1 for your first site and then just increment from there. So if your state has 300 early voting sites, you're going to have 1 through 300 for, you know, your column A. And then your source ID, your column B, it can be an official ID if your you know, state gives you something, the county, wherever you're getting that file from. But if they don't, you can make something up, you know, and use it as just like an internal tracking for you. So it's an optional field. Column D is your okay. Not that one. Okay. Well, column E, so column D is the county FIPS code. Then column E is the location name. So whatever the location is where early voting is taking place. F is address line. You know, G is like a location detail. So similar to what Paul mentioned around polling locations, maybe having some sort of a detail information. Early voting might have that. And I'll kind of show folks what that looks like, since in Nevada we did have that before. So for example, it might be like early voting at the Macy's, you know, in the parking lot. And so like the location detail would say like, you know, behind the parking lot of this store, you know, whatever that might be. Then you're going to want to have your city, your state, the state FIPS code, the zip code. And then latitude and longitude are obviously going to be really important. Can't stress those enough, because that's how Van's going to be able to, populate it in Van. And then when folks are actually, you're having conversations with folks either at the doors or virtual phone bank, and you have that field available for your callers or your canvassers to see, they're going to then be able to tell that person, this is the closest site to you. And I think, if memory serves me right, it might even show up to 2 depending, so they have a few options along with all the details that you added, such as the location detail, the address, the city and the state, so that you can tell folks like, this is the closest to you and this is the schedule for that particular site. So then schedule is the next important field. Some schedules can get really long, so kind of setting it up in this way, so like abbreviations of the days of the week, the date, and then the times. And then the exceptions column is basically if your county secretary of state has assigned any exceptions for that particular site. So for example, a site might be open Monday through Friday, with the exception being on Saturday, instead of being open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday, they're actually going to be open from 10 to 6 p.m. or whatever it might be. So that's something that you would add into your exceptions column. And then just quickly bringing it back here, there is character limits, so you have to be just like really careful with how you abbreviate things and trying to keep the information minimal. Notes, any notes that you might have. The source is basically where you got your information from, and it's sort of, you could say, like a verification, like an extra step. I think when loading polling locations, it's a similar thing. You have to give the source of where you got it from, then the date that information was acquired, and then the countywide column T is basically asking, if this is true for countywide, if it's going to be available, if it's countywide site, and then Van precinct IDs if you have any. So I know that was really quickly, so I'm just going to pull up like a real kind of example here from Nevada. So in Nevada, we only did work in 2 states, so it was, in 2 counties, so it's a little bit easier. I know some folks might actually have to go through their Secretary of State to kind of get statewide early voting locations if you're doing work in multiple states, but I think similarly to other folks who have mentioned this, work with your C4 counterpart. So for example, I worked with mine when I was in Nevada, and they were doing work in Northern Nevada on the C4 side. So she would load all the C4 early voting locations that were in the north. Sorry, not C4, but, because they were running a program there. And I would load everything in Southern Nevada or Clark County. So this obviously has changed, especially around Election Day, as Arturo mentioned. But, I'd come to their site and then I'd get the file, and so I saved it here somewhere, but basically they have 2 forms. So before, they only used to have it in a not very useful, there we go, setup, where you only got a PDF file or a sample ballot version is what they had available. So I actually had to write everything, and type it in, to something more workable like this. Luckily, it wasn't that many sites. Clark only had 14, so it wasn't as bad. And because they actually didn't change that much year to year, I was able to kind of just, change the exceptions and the schedule information. So that was neat. I know that's not the case for, all folks. So if that information is constantly changing, you're going to have to update that. But actually this year now they have an actual Excel spreadsheet that folks can download. So it's actually a little bit easier, though not in a useful format. So you are probably going to have to do some sort of typing. As you can see here, they have it like by day, but the sites repeat and the schedule might change. So it's still going to be doing some sort of compilation of putting everything together in a useful format. But this is basically what it looked like at the end after my C4 counterpart and I put our files together. So here we had the IDs that we assigned to the sites. The location name, so the boulevard, mall, the address, the location detail information, state, zip, the latitudes and longitudes. For latitudes and longitudes, you can use Google Maps. There's definitely a lot of resources, so you can just do a quick Google search and find out latitude and longitude information. And then basically typing in the schedule. We had a lot of exceptions, as you can see. And then when we didn't, we just nulled the column. If we didn't have notes, at this time we didn't have any source because it was just the county site, so we left it blank in this case. The date that we acquired that information, and if it applied to the county-wide, and it did, so it was true in our case. And yeah, that's kind of the process there. It might vary, again, depending on your state, if you're getting this from your Secretary of State or if you're doing it by county. I think if you're running a statewide program, it's probably going to be best to try to have something statewide. If you're only doing it in a few counties, then you can kind of make those decisions based on your particular needs. So I know that was a lot, but again, there is this resource here, it's called Early Vote Location Loading Explanation and Examples Excel in the Google Drive. I'll copy it into a link in the Slack channel for folks to have easier access there. And I don't know if folks have any questions, please feel free to chime in.
All right, go ahead.
This is so for locations that are not countywide, what precinct IDs do you put in there, and do you just like separate them by commas, or what goes in there?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So unfortunately, I'm not sure because I didn't have that experience. All of ours were countywide, so folks could go to any site in the county because it's early voting. There's not those constraints. So I will actually hand that off. I don't know if somebody else on the phone has experienced that and can maybe speak to that a little bit.
I'll look into it, Michelle.
Thanks.
Just really quickly, something that I forgot to mention, but that is important, is that obviously this is going to be sent off to Van for them to load. So you'll send this as a support ticket to them once it's ready, letting them know that you're sending off early voting locations, and they'll get those loaded for you, and they'll follow up if anything looks out of whack. If they have any questions, they'll definitely follow up with you as well.
Great, thanks, Yardani. I'm gonna turn it over to Jamal. Jamal, if you run a little late, that's fine because we'll just continue recording it if anyone needs to jump off. So go ahead, Jamal.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll try to be, be quick and cognizant of folks' time. But so I'm gonna be covering just some tips, some advice about turf coordination. And for those who might not know what that might mean, it's basically if you have all of your partners being able to coordinate specifically with canvassing and doors, but where each partner is going to be doing their work, and making sure that partners aren't stepping on each other's toes, and that basically we're making the most of all of our efforts together. So one of the biggest things I want to stress is that the turf coordination is going to go a lot better, a lot smoother, and a lot easier on both yourself and on all of your partners if you the earlier that you start. So starting early is key to turf coordination. So really, if you haven't started already, try to do that like as soon as possible. So and what that really entails is placing out to everybody, all of your partners, letting them know that to give you the places that they desire to be in. One of the ways that we did this in Georgia was we created a Google Doc, or like a Google form really, where we sent it out to all of our partners. They would fill it out and let us know which areas that they wanted to be within. And then we would follow up with partners just to make sure that everybody that was doing GOTV work did complete that form. What that helped us to do was be able to predict ahead of time which areas within the state are going to be the most competitive, right? And when I say competitive, I mean which areas the most people want to be within. It helps also if you're new to your state, if you could speak with somebody like maybe a past data manager or somebody else that's familiar with your partners within your state. Maybe your executive director might be aware of this, but to figure out ahead of time which areas might be historically have had a lot of people within those areas. I know particularly in Georgia, one of our areas that has historically been one of the very most contentious areas where a lot of partners want to be in would be the NPUV neighborhood, which is in Southwest Atlanta. A lot of partners historically wanted to be there. However, what we found out is when we started doing those feelers, when we started having those conversations with our partners and sending out that survey, we realized that, this time, excuse me, this year, not as many partners wanted to be there because of some gentrification trends, and the folks that they wanted to talk to weren't always there. So we had some partners that still wanted to be there, but then the tension was a little bit released because, after having conversations with our partners, we found out that people wanted to go other places. So to backtrack a little bit, the first thing is to start early. Send out a feeler to be able to, like a Google form survey to be able to see where people would like to be. And then once you send that, have follow-up meetings with each of your partners, with yourself and your executive director. Your executive director is likely going to be doing this anyway, so they can get the numbers and get the areas that partners want to be in to be able to coordinate their efforts. But make sure that you're involved with that meeting. In 2017, when our executive director was newer to her role and she didn't have us within that conversation, so it made things a little bit more complicated when we're doing the turf coordination at that point. This year, I was in every single one of those meetings, so the turf coordination has been going a lot smoother this year. So make sure that you're in those conversations with each one of your partners, and when you're going to be asking them, what type of work that they're doing, what areas they want to do that work within, and then what are their goals that they would like to reach for when it comes to the doors, when it comes to phones, if they're doing pledge to vote, if they're doing mailers, whatever their GOTV effort is, you're gonna want to know what their goals are so that you can be able to take that information back when you're actually allocating out turf and figuring out where people should be going. From there, after you've had all those conversations with all of your partners, and again, that might take some work to be able to make sure that everybody has that meeting and has that time to be able to discuss. Make sure you're taking good notes, take those back, and that's when the real work begins. So you're going to be, the way I found most useful is creating a spreadsheet, right? Where you have exporting of all the areas that your partners would want to be in, and then or could be in, and you can just do that export based off of precinct. It's always best to do it based off of precincts rather than city, because the precincts are a small enough geography where you can allocate turf out pretty well. However, it's not something like a city where there's unincorporated areas and there's ambiguity between what belongs where. Precincts cover the entire state as opposed to having incorporated and unincorporated areas. So having a column with all of the precincts where your partners will be doing work or could be doing work, and then having each of your partners and labeling and having the numbers of the demographics of the people that are within each of those precincts. So let's say your table is focusing on people of color or New American majority, and certain partners want to focus on certain demographics, right? So have columns that are labeled for each of those demographics that partners are going to be working within, broken down by numbers by precinct. And you can do that easily by doing accounts and crosstabs in Van. And from there, have a partners be in at the top with all the rows, and you can just allocate out. Okay, so this partner, let's say Asian Americans Advancing Justice, they have a goal of reaching 1,000 conversations. Our table regrants that it was an expectation to have 25%, so we need to create a 4,000 person universe. For regranting purposes, you might want to give them a little bit of wiggle room from there. And so these are how many doors that they're going to need to have accessible. And you can go by each precinct, see how many people are within that precinct that Asian Americans Advancing Justice would like to canvass, and then just put those doors right by each of those precincts. Then you'll have a sum at the top where with the total universe. So, and you can do that for each one of your partners. And when you finish with that, you'll have a spreadsheet that marks where every single person would be. So, I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time. So again, if you have any questions about this, I can answer those now. I can also coordinate with anybody offline to go into details about this as well.
Thanks, Jamal. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, you all know the experts now on some of these things. And, I know that everyone is willing to help you out. So definitely ask questions in Slack, get in contact with me or, any data manager that you or national staff that you feel might be helpful in this regard. And we'll make sure that you get the help that you need. This is a really great call. Thank you so much for everyone's participation. I really appreciate everyone's hard work on this. And good luck with GOTV this year. Thanks.
Thank you.